And we are live. Welcome. It is Wednesday, the lunch hour here in Mountain Time Zone, the greatest time zone in America. I will put that out there as the first thing I state on today's episode. Maybe controversial. Share your opinions in the comments if you have any pushback on me. The greatest time zone in America, the Mountain Time Zone. My name is Brian Brinkman. I'm here with my good friend, who is shaking his head from the East Coast, from the Eastern time zone, RJB. We are here with HFPod on tour live coming at you. RJ, how are you doing? And do you agree or disagree with what I said?
I mean, I don't want to start off on a bad note, but I just think you're not right about this one.
Could you make your case? What is your rationale? I have very clear rationale. I could back this up forever.
I mean, I think the East Coast and West Coast are better than the mountain time zone. Yeah. Central, is probably in last place.
Central's terrible. I grew up in Central. My reason for Mountain is you get sports that start at like 4:30, 5 o'clock, and then you can watch the late games. And when Fish plays the Gorge, it's just a little late. But have you ever tried to watch a Gorge show? Have you ever tried to webcast a Fish Gorge show from the East Coast?
Yeah, I have. It's not easy. So you're right. Fun. If you're thinking about it in terms of sports and live streaming music, then I agree with that. I thought you were talking just about like life in general.
Well, what else is there to life than sports and live streaming concerts?
Good point.
I mean, I'm failing to understand.
That's a good point.
We are not here, though, to talk about time zones. We will do that on our other live time zone podcast where we talk about where they break down, what exactly they encompass, why they exist. We are here to talk about a very, very special moment in Fish history that we are going to break down for you all. And that is the interview that the band embarked upon on June 19th, 1994 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. This is the start of a brand new series that we are doing here on HFPod Live, where we take great past wild interviews that the band took part in throughout their career. We play a little bit of it. We talk about our thoughts on where the band was at the time, and we kind of break it down. They all kind of, for a variety of reasons, have a ton of different appeal. Before we do that, though, I do want to remind all of our wonderful listeners out there that if you haven't already, please subscribe to Osiris Media on Apple Podcasts. You will get, among other things, HF Pod Premium. We have a new episode going live tomorrow, a new premium episode. RJ, do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about what they would hear if they subscribe to Osiris Media on Apple Podcasts tomorrow?
Sure. Yeah, you'd get our HF Pod Premium episodes this week. It's we're going to be breaking down Trey's new solo acoustic record, which is fun. But you also get ad-free podcasts for a ton of our shows and probably more in the future, but those are the things you get right now. And what else do you need other than right now? You know what I mean?
Right now is all that matters. And that's what you're getting right now. But we have a lot that's in the works in the future. But I'm really excited for this episode to go live. I just finished working on it. You, myself, and Jonathan all sit down and talk through this new album that Trey surprise dropped on us last week. Solo acoustic, 8-9 tracks, all kind of recent material. It's really it's a fascinating record, and we dive deep into it.
Yeah, I would tell you what I think about it, but you have to subscribe to find out.
Yeah, everything I say will be silent because it's behind a paywall at this point in time. That's just how this works. That said, the other thing I want to tell you about before we jump into the main topic of today, and there's a lot to break down in this interview. I don't know if any of you have watched the 6/19/94 interview in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but we're going to play a little bit. Like I said, it takes you back to a very special time in Fish history. I also want to tell you about our wonderful sponsor here, Sunset Lake CBD. They have a line of smokable hemp products that are for both the old deadhead or the middle-aged deadhead, young fish fan, or perhaps the middle-aged fish fan, the young up-and-coming goose fan, or perhaps the middle-aged goose fan, any one of us who's in there, maybe even the old goose fan. I met an old goose fan at the Denver show back in November. He was great. He jumped right from the dead to goose. It was very cool to talk to him about. But any one of these people who are searching for a mellow body high, Smoking CBD has all the benefits of high THC cannabis without the paranoia or the anxious side effects. There's 9 different strains from this year's harvest, so there's something for everyone. Hawaiian Haze is awesome for an outdoor show. Cherry Abacus is best for the end of the night. All the flower is grown, cured, and trimmed by Sunset Lake CBD farmers. Even better, Sunset Lake CBD's farm to table approach gets you great pricing on premium CBD flower by shipping it directly from their farm to your door. And I just want to tell you really quick, like the other night, I finished work, kids were down, and I wanted to play some guitar. And I smoked a little bit of the Sunset Lake CBD smokables, and it was perfect. I was mellow. I could still think. I could still move my fingers in ways that I can't if I take a big hit off of a THC bowl. And I was just like, I was in the perfect headspace. I was mellow. I was chilled out, and I was playing guitar better than I've ever played guitar. I'll tell you what, it sounded great to me. I don't know how it sounded to anybody else, but it felt great. And it was all thanks to this experience I was having with Sunset Lake CBD. Check them out today at sunsetlakecbd.com and use coupon code HFPod for 20% off all products. Again, that's Sunset Lake CBD, farmer owned, Vermont grown. And with that, should we dive into 61994?
I think we should. And I just want to say this: the series idea is a good one. The interview series, and we're also going to talk about some of the shows and the tour around this particular interview. So I'm excited. Where do you want to go first?
Well, why don't we just set the context in terms of where the band was at before we jump into the interview? So this is June 19th, 1994. They're about a month and a half into the spring summer 94 tour, a tour that's been revered throughout history. Tell me just personally, and kind of, as you've thought about the band over the last 30 years, what do you think about this period in Phish history, and where do you see them at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is when I started getting a lot of tapes in more or less real time, or at least with some slight delays. So I remember all these tapes, from spring and summer '94, and they were just kind of hitting their stride. They were really the spring '94 tour, like you said, was sort of covered by a lot of fans, and I think people were just starting to see the opportunities that Fish had with improv and opening some of these songs up. I mean, they play like kind of a pretty small rotation of songs at this point. I mean, it's growing every tour, but there's not a lot. Like every there's a tweezer like every third show, and there's a stash and
Yeah.
Reba, Antelope, Bowie. There's so much, but it's such a fun time because they're just starting. I think this was the second summer that they really were playing big amphitheaters and big venues. um and the whole tour, to me, there's one highlight from this tour, which is the 6/11/94 Red Rocks show, which has this, there was a broadcast on the radio, so there's a great sounding version of tape that circulated, but the You Enjoy Myself is just great. And that there's so many great jams. I actually went back to a bunch in preparation for this. Can I just run through a few of them real quick? Would that be okay?
Please, please. As the man who loves running through jams for context, I would love to have you do this.
Okay. So there's too many to go through, but just very quickly, summer '94, 610 Tweezer. There's the 617 Milwaukee show, which is the OJ show. The whole thing is just fun with a lot of good banter. 618 Divided Sky, which Trey's talked about as a kind of transformational moment for him. And that show also has an incredible David Bowie. There's also the 622 show, which is from Columbus, which has like this just insane adventure. Probably the best Iculus of all time, with Trey just screaming. And it's so great. It's such a great show. 626, there's a Gamehenge, first set Gamehenge show. 7-2 and 7-4 both have great tweezers, and basically all of the Rebas and stashes from this tour are really fantastic. There's a 713 Big Birch. I remember getting that tape with like a tweezer fest, like sort of like the Bomb Factory and others. And then the tour ender at Sugarbush, which is just a great listen all the way through 716. So that's my quick rundown. There's probably a lot more.
Well, it's interesting because it is a tour that, like, we've mapped out kind of what we want to cover with this going forward. And there's just like, it's like every other show has 4 or 5 highlights that you want to dive into. But I think that's a great overview. I was thinking about this in conjunction with the episode that we did last week with Benji Isom, where we dove into March 1992. And that month saw a ton of debuts ahead of the release of Rift a year later. And then throughout 1993, there's not a ton of debuts. They're really just honing this song catalog that they've built over 10 years. And they're really starting to just crack it open and expand on it. And all the while in the fall, they're recording Hoist. So you jump into the
Yeah.
spring 94 tour. They've just released Hoist. 8 of the 10 tracks have been unheard of by the fan base. So those are all new songs. They're pushing it on a nightly basis. And, listening to the spring 94 tour, you can really hear it in 2 halves as they tour until Laguna Seca Days Festival at the end of May, and then the Red Rocks run that starts in June and carries them through Sugarbush, where you hear that April-May run really focused on pushing these new songs with this crazy outlier show at the Bomb Factory. And then they come back in June and it's almost like they're like, all right, we're going to still push Hoist, but everything's off the table. And we're just going to screw around and embrace chaos and embrace uncertainty and jam. And you find them at this point in the tour, having just played the night before a brilliant show in Chicago. The night before that, this crazy mashup show, which they would repeat throughout the tour. It's just such an exciting time to see the band. And I think also one thing you said, that Red Rock show, it's one of the first shows that I don't know when this stopped happening, probably when streaming became more of like a normal way that you got into Fish through like the re-listen app. But 6/11/94 was one of those shows that, like, as I was getting into Fish, someone's older brother was like, you have to hear this show. And I was not unique in that. Like, that was across the Fish universe, was someone was passed to a new fan. You have to listen to 6/11/94 because it's just it's everything you would want from Fish in a single show at that point.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I mean, the sound quality is great. I went back after listening to that and went back to the day before, the 610, and the sound
Mm.
is just so different. I mean, the soundboard it shows, versus the audience tapes in those days are wow, there's a big difference.
I think the other interesting thing, just before we jump into this, is the band was giving a lot of interviews at this point, and there was a lot of press around the band in early 1994, and it was really the last big push of, can we turn Fish into a Blues Traveler? Can we turn Fish into a Dave Matthews Band? And we talked a bit about this in our Hoist episode last month, but this kind of big media push that the band went under throughout this tour, I think is important context as we jump into this interview, which is not necessarily a big media draw. It's a local interview ahead of their show in Kalamazoo, where the band is, in some cases, it seems kind of flabbergasted that they are spending 30 minutes of their time having this conversation while being good sports throughout it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind as we talk about it is, like you said, they're doing more press. They just released the Down with Disease video and Hoist, and um, do they really need at this point, because they're selling, they're playing all these big amphitheaters that they will play
Mhm.
for years to come. So do they really like need the publicity from a local access, Kalamazoo station? Because they definitely act like they don't. Um, while they're talking to the guy. But at the same time, maybe that's just like that's their way of they're like, if we are gonna get publicity, we're gonna do it our own way.
It's a good point, and, like, it kinda makes me think about the way that tours were structured up until this point, like 1990 through 1994. You see them still visiting, like, Santa Fe, New Mexico, which absolutely nothing against Santa Fe, New Mexico. I would love for Fish to play Santa Fe again, it'd be amazing, but, like, it's not a market that's gonna draw Fish back in a couple of years. And if you look at, like, say the 1996 fall tour, where they go out west and they start on the East Coast and they move out west over a 3-month period in time, they're no longer hitting like small college towns. They're hitting big cities as they're moving out west. And they're essentially saying, at this point, even if we can't sell out an arena, it's better for us to play the Arco Arena than it is for us to play 3 venues in Northern California and, kind of make our way through the southern coast of California. So, this is kind of one of those last tours where there is that they're playing Kalamazoo the night after they play Chicago. They're going to play Indiana in a couple of nights. They're going to play Columbus, Ohio, and Cincinnati. They're going to play Charleston, West Virginia. They're in this very interesting middle ground of we're a big band. We don't necessarily need local DJs to be interviewing us, but also that's how we made it. And why don't we give this guy a chance as well?
Yeah. Let's talk about the interview, can we? This is too
We're going to
good.
do it. So let's jump into it. We're going to play a bit of our favorite parts of the interview, and then we're going to break it down here. So give me one sec to get this all loaded up. Without further ado, I present Fish Television Interview 6/1994, Part 1.
Here he is.
Hi, I'm Big Daddy Duras, and that great music you're hearing is the music of Fish. Now, Fish just played at the State Theater in downtown Kalamazoo this past June, and because they're such great guys, they took time out of their busy schedule to give us an interview. Now, if you're familiar with the music of Fish, you know these guys play straight from the heart. But now we're going to meet the guys themselves, find out more about the personalities that make up this great band. If you're not familiar with Fish, stick around, because we're also going to be checking out their first and thus far only video, Down with Disease, from their latest album, Hoist. So, enough said. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Fish.
I love this part right here.
Big Daddy Do from Kalamazoo.
Okay.
That's great.
Your immediate thoughts.
Well, I will say that a cappella lead-in is definitely the most effort that they put into the entire thing by a lot, and not in a bad way, because it's great, but it's like they did definitely I don't know. Looking at that makes you think that they were like this is really an awesome thing, and then they start talking to him, and it's so awkward from the start, like on purpose, not like they didn't have anything to say. They were just kind of trolling him from the beginning, which I guess is just kind of what they do.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and we'll jump into it when we look at the actual interview here. Like he's got long hair, he's got a tie-dye shirt on, he knows about the band. Like it's this weird line between he's a fan and he's also got the access, and you can tell that like they're just screwing around with him in the same way that they would a journalist from like the New York Times. But it's also like, there's some empathy showcase that like, all right, we can't screw around with him too much. We've got to bring him in on some of these jokes. One thing I noticed was like the phrase "nuff said," like when you actually like had the apostrophe NUFF, is like the most 1990s phrase, early 1990s phrase that you could have. And I just love how there's like the shrug and then he just says "nuff said."
We should bring that back. We should bring that back. I think we should bring it back.
I think that's how we're gonna close every episode now.
I mean, it's hard to not like watch this and not just think about how 90s it is. I mean, that's kind of the point. But man, they just from the beginning, like Mike seems like he's interested in potentially answering a question, and the rest of them are just passing. They have one mic between the four of them. So Trey would like, I mean, we'll listen to a couple other clips, but Trey would either like not answer the question or just pass, like say one thing and then pass the mic to Fishman, and then Fishman would say something goofy. And Mike and Paige seem to be the most willing to actually answer questions, which is just, man, they just never stop fucking with people, And I think that's part of the era. at this point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's the point where, like, how many times do you think they've gone into an earnest interview that they've been told by either Elektra or by anyone in management that, like, all right, this is going to be a big interview for you guys, and it just doesn't land, and it doesn't really take them anywhere. They don't see record sales take off, and yet at the same time they walk out on stage every night to a sold out theater, and they're about to play Jones Beach towards the end of this summer. They did a huge tour of amphitheaters the year before. They're at this point in their career where it's like, well, we actually don't need this. So why would we go into this sort of interview with any sort of earnestness? The one question I had before we jump into our second clip here, I'm kind of surprised that, like, the tweezer riff didn't take off more. It sounds so badass. Like, is there a better song that you think they could have introduced an interview with like this with?
No, it's the best. I mean, that's why we all love it so much. It's such a great riff. Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if they got like offers to use it in commercials and things like that and just said no, because I know that Paluska had talked about on After Midnight, how they were clearly so anti-commercial from the beginning, but that riff has some commercial legs, I think.
Caesar with a tweezer in the new Nissan Xterra 1994, and that's
Yeah.
be amazing. All right, I want to throw up a new clip. This is this may be my favorite funny moment of the entire interview. Big Daddy has a very genuine question for the band, something I think all of us at times have been interested in. What kind of music do you guys listen to? And the answer that the band gives is just fascinating. So we're going to jump into this.
First style of music. I was wondering, when you guys were growing up, was this like, for each of you, I guess, was this common in your household? Your parents really musical and opened you to a bunch of different
I don't know if any of our
styles?
parents were particularly musical, except maybe Paige's were a bit. But I know that there was always some strange music around, as well as the Beatles.
Beatles?
My mother is a real big music fan. She played a lot of strange music in the house, as well as the Beatles.
My parents loathed the Beatles and all other music.
I first started listening to the Beatles because my brother was a big Beatles fan, but my dad was a big Dixieland jazz fan, so I grew up in the house with Dixieland jazz and the Beatles. It is. It's not normal. It's odd, but it's good. It's without meter, but it's timely. It's a music whose time has come. Thanks.
I mean, this is like, I feel so bad for Big Daddy, I mean, this has happened to me before, in an interview where I was purposely trolled by the band. Matt and I were.
Go on.
It's it's another band in this improvisational scene that we may or may not have just launched a podcast with. It was fun, but they were just, when, I guess part of it is just like there's this inside joke thing,
that you're not a part of. Like, you're just a guy that's here now. Yeah.
You're just out. Yeah. And like, you don't have the 20 years of experience with them, or the 10 or whatever. So, you're going to pay for it. And yeah, Justin just said Paige going along with the gag. I mean, you can tell that Paige's instinct is to be earnest and helpful, and then he just like has to like go with the trick. I mean, man.
I like how certain things have just not changed with Fish, and Justin makes a really good point there. Like, Mike makes this comment about listening to his parents listening to really obscure music, also the Beatles, which who did not grow up, who among us that are like Fish fans, we're not listening to the Beatles from birth type of thing. They were just like the foundation of classic rock music in all of our houses. And Trey immediately realizes that he's got a joke to continue, but then the joke is too funny in his head, and he has to like hold back laughter so that he can get it out. And then by the time he gets to Paige, it's like his is almost the most cutting, because he's like, it wasn't weird, or it's quite weird to listen to the Beatles, but we did it, and it was of a time. And I don't know, there's something about him ending all of these comments. There was a moment earlier where they asked, Big Daddy asked them what their favorite song was from the new record. And before he could answer Axilla, Fishman just goes, Axilla.
Yeah.
And then all of their answers are, our drummer's favorite song from this record is Axilla.
And then the interviewer said, and Big Daddy says it's my favorite too. And then they add that in and say, the interviewer and our drummer. I mean, they're just having fun, which it just brings me back to the question I asked before, which is like, are they trying to be serious at all? I mean, are they trying to like just do their brand of humor in the hopes of achieving some kind of goal with getting the name out there? Or are they actually just like, I mean, you can hear a sound check going on behind them. So they're just kind of like hanging out before the show. So I wonder if there's any part of them that's like, this is going to be helpful to us, because it doesn't seem like that's what they're going with.
Well, I wonder as well, like, if Big Daddy were Matt Pinfield, and this was like, hey, we happen to be in Kalamazoo for, I don't know why they would be in Kalamazoo in June 1994, but we're aligning with your guys' tour in Philadelphia, and we want to do a tour. We want to do an interview of you guys. If the band would come across kind of tight and not super into like laying into jokes, and if Big Daddy is almost like them playing an out of the way venue where they just end up playing a classic show because they just feel like they can be loose and they can just hang out with this guy and they can have fun with him. And he's a part of like, he seems to be a part of the fan base, and he seems to be like a good dude who like means well, but like, we're just going to like rib you the whole time. Whereas like, if it was a bigger journalist, like they're actually going to try to explain who they are while sounding, less capable of communicating what makes Fish so special.
Right. Well, and I know that we're going to look at an interview later in the series where they do kind of try to take it more seriously, although it's much later. Yeah. I mean, I know that one thing about the interview, I know from talking to Trey and trying to interview him on various occasions, the right route in is where Big Daddy eventually goes, which is the like talking about the gear and the music, and like once he starts asking about the guitars and the practice and the that sort of thing, like then they start actually answering the questions. But when you can't really approach a band like this with the like, tell me about your upbringing or whatever, even though that's like a totally reasonable question to ask, like what music did you listen to growing up? But I think it like genuinely piques their interest when someone asks them about the guitar or the microphone or the speakers, or I mean, Trey's still like that to this day. So I think he eventually lands on the right path.
Well, we're going to jump to that because the part 2 has 2 very, very like insightful and in-depth answers that I think are really fascinating, while also showcasing the flaw of the overall interview itself. I want to show one more thing that I thought was hilarious. They're talking at this point. Big Daddy asks them about if it's challenging to play guitar or play instruments and sing at the same time, which when I heard the question, I was like, man, that is like, I would be really afraid to ask a professional musician that, because it's kind of like asking like a baseball player, like, is it hard to throw the ball to first base? But then I started thinking like certain baseball players get the yips and they like literally can't throw the ball to first base. And I was thinking about how rare it was to hear a voice other than Paige or Trey. And I was thinking about like, I play guitar and sometimes I try to sing and I like have to completely change the way I strum. I was like, actually, this is a really good question. But they start to talk about their role in the band. Keyword. And it lands on John Fishman, who gives this answer when asked about if he can sing and play drums at the same time.
I find singing and playing at the same time difficult because of my role as well. My closed role in particular, and sometimes my double stroke role. But mainly the role, I've gained a little weight on this tour. And I find that role is what gets in my way most of the time.
I've been singing and playing for a long time together. And because of my role, I think that it's maybe not as hard as, say, the bass player or the drummer.
Who have more roles?
Mike's losing roles, Fish is gaining roles. My roles pretty much stayed the same.
Paige is actually on a roll in the chess tournament, whipping Fish's.
Oh yeah,
But
chess players. Okay.
he's on a roll.
Again, Paige just has to be earnest and answer the question.
Paige has to be earnest, and also I was thinking about the fact that like this is like an insight into their jamming process almost, where they land on a word and they build that word out as like, all right, how it's like a game of telephone almost. It like lands on Fishman, and suddenly roll doesn't mean you're rolling the band. It means I've gotten a little fat while I'm sitting in the back of the van driving across America.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like the hay hole, right? It's like the
exactly.
It is like that. Yeah. That's yeah. I mean, what Trey said earlier before Fishman started talking was like, I realized eventually that it was hard for Mike to play the songs that I wrote and sing at the same time. So I've realized that it's harder. It's like they start to get, a little more earnest as the thing goes along, but man, it takes a long time.
Well, should we jump into one of the earnest comments?
Yeah. I think we should. I think we should give the people what they want.
All right. So we set the context here earlier. This is the afternoon after the June 18th, 1994 show from the UIC Pavilion, a very famous show. Trey talked on Charlie Rose about having a religious experience during Divided Sky. This was officially released. It has a great version of David Bowie. And Big Daddy has, I think, the best question of the entire interview, and it leads to some great commentary from Trey before being abruptly cut off. We will see all of that.
Okay, well, along the same lines as the songwriting, when you guys do these songs live, do you beforehand kind of say, well, here we're going to jam out and sort of a reggae-ish feel for so long, and then we'll go to this, or is sort of half and half, or is it really all of it off when you really sort of go off on one of your jams there?
I'd say more off the cuff than your first description, where, for instance, last night we played a song called David Bowie.
Off of Junta.
And we played the first note of the song, indicating now we're going to start playing the song. And then we just started jamming. And we had this, one of my favorite moments of the night, a little extended jam there at the first part of the song, which isn't where we normally would.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely an attitude that anything goes. I mean, my feeling is that once you're up on stage, you're free. Hopefully you've created as much freedom as you can in your mind and in the air and in the spiritual way around the room, and you just go for it. And then the songs kind of go and come and go, and off you go with your friend Pete Shaw.
That's a great sound there, Paige. I love that organ of yours. I was just actually
I mean, if he, looking back, if he had known that he was going to interrupt like a description of the Mind Left Body jam at the beginning of the 6/18/94 Bowie, like he might not have, but he was just transfixed by the organ.
He was transfixed by the organ. And I also wonder that part, like when they were setting up the interview, I'm guessing, the band comes out of the dressing room. They know they've got to do this interview, and they're just like, you're okay with sound check in the background. And like, for those of us, you and I, who work, trying to set up interviews that we can then release as podcasts. If a band says that, like, what do you do? Because you got to get the interview and you have like 25 minutes with the band, but also like, I want to release something that sounds really good where I can get you fully focused and not hearing and me not hearing weird noises in the background that are going to distract us in any sort of way. So it adds to like the loose aspect of this overall interview with fitting for the time.
Complicated. It's probably easier to do an interview with sound check in the background than it is to do an interview with 17 cannabis joints being passed around by Shift Genuine Cannabis, which happened.
Wait, we have to ask questions still.
Yeah. It's like, did we start yet? So yeah, I mean, that's cool though. They do get into it, and it just takes a little while, But I don't know. I guess part of it, I do wonder if some of this stuff is like, okay, this guy's clearly a fan, but some of the questions he asked toward the beginning, this is more like looking at the interview process. Like, if you're informed and you're asking informed questions, you're obviously going to get better answers, right? So the more kind of generic the question, the less likely you are to get a good answer. But if you
Yeah.
do a little bit more homework and ask like a more detailed question, like he was doing in the second part, man, it's wild. Yeah, it's afternoon, afternoon in Kalamazoo, and probably like one of the highlights of this guy's year. He finally starts getting some good info out of them.
It brings up an interesting question that I'd written down in our doc. You talk about like he interrupts. If he had known he's interrupting Trey breaking down this jam from the night before, the kind of thing that like I think listeners like us would kill for. Like, you played this amazing jam last night. Tell us about it. Just what did it sound like? What did it feel like to you? And you can see Trey looking around at the band members and be like, did everyone else agree? Was that as good as I thought it was? Because, who knows if they're like walking off stage and immediately talking about that type of thing. But at the same time, he's in the moment, and he can't know at this point that summer 1994 is going to be so revered, 28 years later. Is there a question, or are there questions that you would have asked the band at this point in time?
Oh man, I mean, I have a lot of questions that I want to ask the band at this point in time.
Totally.
So going backwards, I mean, I think he was on the right track. I think it's so rare. I guess probably 97 is when they stopped really paying attention to what happened, right? There's like sort of consciously stopped talking about and analyzing what was happening. But that's pretty rare to have a band member like really explain what's going on in a jam. That's pretty cool. I don't know. I mean, I guess I probably would have asked about specific songs, because like there was something about that tour with Stash, for example. So if you'd seen or listened to 4 shows before this, which would have been impossible at the time unless you were on tour, like what
And
about that?
taping.
Yeah, and taping. Like, what about that what about that song is like really making things click for you guys? Because that's where like things seem to really work every time. But I don't know. What about you?
I think about, at this point in the tour, there's like 2 things happening beyond the songs are being performed at an exceptionally high level. You have jams like the Bowie from UIC, the Bowie from Charlotte a couple months earlier, the Bomb Factory Tweezer, these big open-ended jams. But then you also have sets like the Milwaukee set that happened 2 nights prior, where they're not necessarily jamming an extended length, but everything flows together in a way that like it all kind of ends up feeling like one song. And I think I'd be curious to know like what is, if not necessarily inspiring them, like what are they hearing and what are they feeling when they're playing those 2 types of
Mhm.
experimental sets? Do they feel more free when they're just jumping off a cliff and just seeing what happens, or when they have a little bit more of kind of a punkish approach to it, where it's like, we're just gonna fuck these songs up and throw them into a stew and figure out how they all kind of blend together? Like, is there a fun factor to that? Is there to both of those, or is there something that they're learning more from one versus the other? I would imagine the jamming is where they're learning more from, because that's just what they're going to take with them more. But it does seem like, at least nowadays in Fish, when Trey wants to have fun, he does like a mashup set, and that's still like an aspect of Fish history that they, if not consciously, like is still a part of them that they still really enjoy. So that would be where I'd be really curious to find out where their
Yeah.
heads are at.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, and then you look at the show that they play this night, and it's fine. It's like very fine. Like I think there's a couple 12-minute songs, which there's a good Stash, good Antelope, good Reba. So when they do jam, it's great. And then there's just like a lot of songs that they run through, and well played and fast and all that.
Yeah.
So, and then you look at like the show 3 nights after this in Columbus, which is one of the most famous shows that they played, and it's just totally different and outrageous. So yeah, it's I don't think anyone has ever really been able to describe. I mean, from any band, right? Like
Right.
why things happen in certain nights, which is just kind of crazy.
I was also just thinking, at this point in the tour, we've got what 3 weeks left basically until the Sugar Bus shows.
Yeah.
They're going to play Gamehenge twice. They're going to play it once in West Virginia, and then they're going to play Hoist in the second set in full, and then they're going to play it at Great Woods. And
Yeah.
they're never going to play it again, at least to date.
Yeah.
And I wonder what's going around in their heads. Gamehenge was always kind of Trey's project. What's going around in his head at this point in their career of maybe consciously at this point, they're not even thinking about doing it, but you would have to imagine there's been some rehearsal because of how detailed it is. And those two versions feel probably the most complete that we would hear aside from another version that we'll talk about a little bit later. But, they're going to play this very dedicated first set over the next 2 weeks, and then it's gone. And I just kind of wonder why at that point they're thinking about pushing that one more time or two more times, I guess I should say.
Yeah. Who knows? I mean, they've been on the road for months at this point, and they're sort of heading home slowly. It's really hard to know after being on the road for months, like what's the calculus or what the conversations that are happening or whatever.
It is interesting in the touring cycle standpoint that they're in Michigan and they're at that point where they're making the lap back to the East Coast, and they're going to arrive in, I think that they play the Man on July 1st. And from there for the next 2 weeks, everything is in like the Northeastern corridor. And I wonder what that's like for these guys at this point in time, because they've now done it 4 years in a row where they'll do a tour where they'll start on the East Coast, go out west, wrap back around. It's like 3 months on the road, and you come back, they're just playing shows. They're playing at a very high level, and they're playing in front of their most loyal original fans. It's got to be I wonder if there's like a real excitement around the tour at this point, or if it's more of not necessarily a slog, but like we've got to get through these 10 shows before we get back home.
Yeah, I think they were. I mean, they were so focused on the music at this point. I feel like there probably was just like, especially like we were talking about earlier with these shows. Whether it's like Reba or Bowie or Stash or any of those, Tweezer, any of the actual kind of jam vehicles that existed at the time, they're really good. They're really good. They're really good versions. All of them, and like every Reba is great. So I feel like I think they're still pretty into it at this point. I think they're winding up toward the Sugar Bush finale. I think it's like on an upward climb as they start to head home. There might have been previous, but then there's like little peaks, like they get to play Red Rocks, and then they go through Kansas City and Des Moines and Minneapolis and Milwaukee is the OJ thing. And then they come through USC and then they're in Chicago. So, it's hard to know if they're just like enjoying going to these big cities and hanging out and seeing different things. And they go, Kalamazoo, Cincinnati, Columbus, and all those shows are really different. So I don't know. I guess I just don't know.
Have you ever been on like an elongated road trip across the US that like lasts months?
No.
I have once. And I just remember like every city felt unique, but also the same after a while. Like you'd arrive in like Denver and then Salt Lake City and then San Francisco. And you're like, okay, I get what makes this city. And I understand like this city has this neighborhood that I should go to and has this type of cuisine. But after a while, you're just kind of like, I just want normalcy. And so you start eating kind of like the same foods and you start doing the same things. And like, if you have friends in that city, you just like go to their house and hang out in their backyard. And it's like their backyard in Seattle versus your friend's backyard in Milwaukee, but it feels the exact same to you at that point. And I wonder like if like the US is kind of a blur. Cause like a week earlier they're in Colorado playing the Red Rock shows. Like they've gone across half the country and played like 6 gigs between now and then.
Yeah. I mean, they must be, you know, they go to Chicago, they probably get to go hang out, maybe see some music late night, you know. I think part of it's probably the music that they get to experience while on the road, if at all. I mean, something happened between Cincinnati and Columbus to allow that show to happen. But again, it's all like speculation. We have no idea. But that Columbus show is amazing.
Yeah, I remember getting the live Fish version and just being blown away listening to it. So I want to play one more clip here from this. This is the other really cool moment where he asks about gear. This is a little bit of a longer clip, so just bear with it. But there is like an interruption, and then Trey comes back, and you can just hear Trey talk about his gear in a way that, like RJ was saying earlier, he gets so into this, and he gets so into the idea of like breaking down how he approaches playing guitar. And it's like the first question where he's like, thank you for asking me this.
Couple shop questions real quick. Trey, your tone. It seems like you can, with the sound you have, you can almost stop on just about any note and just get that feedback sustained. And how much of that is the guitar? And oh, by the way, tell me about the guitars by Paul. How do you pronounce it? Languedoc?
Languedoc.
Tell me about those guitars and how much of that's tone and how much is
A lot of it's
amp?
the guitar. It's a hollow body, and Paul designed it
A hollow body.
custom. And we wanted to try to combine some of my favorite things in guitars. One is most hollow body guitars have a short scale length, meaning Les Paul scale length. That's the distance between the bridge and the nut.
Is that a glued on neck or is it neck through?
It's through. It's
Okay, just like the bass, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And except that it only goes the whole thing is completely hollow. There's no block of wood down the middle. I wanted a small body, which is very hard to find in a hollow body guitar, in terms of the Gibsons and whatever there is out there.
Well, this is the original home of Gibson Guitar Company. It was originally in Kalamazoo here.
But I do have an old jazz Gibson that I like a lot. But anyway, the Paul's guitar, it's 24 frets.
24.
Bad hat.
Is it the hollow body feature? That
Yeah,
lets you get the feedback?
that's
Is that what
most
gives
of
you
what
the-
it is. Usually, it's not the amp.
What kind of amps do you use? Anyway?
I use these Mesa Boogie Mark IIIs, which are fine.
Okay, well.
And tube screamers.
Tube screamers.
I try to keep it simple. My philosophy is simpler the better, because when I'm on stage, I don't want to be thinking about anything ever.
Okay.
I don't want to be thinking about the guitar. I don't want to be thinking about the amp. I don't want to be thinking about all I want to be. I don't want to be thinking about.
Basically, you want to be an embryonic sort of stage.
It's true.
Yeah.
We laugh, but it's
I
true.
know that
I
tone.
don't like
Down
to.
to Z. Is that your ADA that gives you that tone?
He's really jumping around. He's like, whatever he hears, he's like, hey, bro, let me ask you about this. The gear stuff is always a winner with these guys,
There's also that moment towards the end. It kind of like ties into what we're talking about in terms of like, where's the band, where is their head at this point in time, where Trey talks about like, I don't want to be thinking on stage, and Fishman jumps in with like, you want to be like in an embryonic stage of life. Trey's like, yeah, like we're joking, but like, I don't want to think at all. And you got to wonder like that experience when you're at that level musically and you jump up on stage and you play, a 3-hour show, and you're kind of not thinking like, how did this go? You're just in it. It's probably hard to then go back in time and process what that actually felt like, because you're just so deep into it. And that seems to be the goal of the band at this point in time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I also like that he said he likes to keep it simple, because if you look at the like gear rundown these days, it's like, it does not seem simple to me, but I guess it's all relative.
It is. I mean, yeah, I feel like at that point, if you listen to Fish, like in 1994, even when they're making weird, obscure noises that they would get into on a much more consistent level in the late 90s, 2.0 today, you think about some of the crazy psychedelic jams. The stuff that he's doing back then is basically like a digital delay loop jam and increasing feedback and then looping that over and over itself, and like Page mashing his grand piano so it like just makes a swell of noise. It's not a lot of effects. There's no synthesizer pedals that are coming into play here.
Definitely not. But this is sort of peak, like really technical proficiency, and he is trying to keep the sound simple, clearly, because he's focused on pulling off the songs, But yeah, really interesting interview. I'm glad you brought it up. I think everyone should watch it. It's only 20 minutes total between the two parts, so it's digestible, but entertaining for sure. So I thought this was a fun one.
I love this interview. I discovered this in like the fall of 2009. I was in South Korea, and I was just like, it was the first time I had fast internet my entire life. And I was just like spending a Thursday night doing a YouTube rabbit hole. It was like around the time that like just stuff was just being uploaded constantly to YouTube. And you were just like, oh my God, like I never knew this existed. I remember finding this and just being blown away to see them at this point in their career. Was there anything for you, anything new that you learned from the band from this interview, or you walked away with like a newfound appreciation of?
Not really.
I guess I'm the same. I feel like I feel like it's just like it almost like just reinforces a perspective that you have of the band at the time.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
that shot of Page as Trey's breaking down his rig, just like staring off into space and then kind of looking back at the band. That like the cerebral thought from Page McConnell as he's trying to joke around with the band.
Yeah.
Fishman just being like so quick-witted and just so capable of like coming up with an immediate joke that just cuts through is amazing. I also loved, this is not something new I learned, but at the start of the interview, we didn't play this. Big Daddy says that he's not going to say that all the members sing, because they all do sing like birds. And as they go around introducing themselves, Fishman just introduces himself as bird singer.
So ridiculous. Never stops.
So this is good. We will do an interview series here every couple of months. We've got another one lined up here for later in the spring. That is one of our favorite interviews that the band has ever been a part of. Next week, we will be back. Unless there's anything you have to add about this Big Daddy interview. And
no, Big Daddy is awesome. I'm really glad he did it.
I am too. It was a great interview. Next week, we'll be back at our standard time, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, to talk about a show that is celebrating its 29th anniversary, I want to say. Yes, 29th. The Crest Theater 3/22, 1993 Gamehenge show. We're going to dive deep into this. We're going to talk about the first set. We're going to talk about the second set. We're going to talk about where they're at in March of 1992 at that point in time, but dive into the first Gamehenge tape I ever heard. I got this. It was like one of my first 15 tapes. It was so great to hear as an early Phish fan. And it just like really captures the magic of what Gamehenge meant to the band at this point in time. I'm really excited about that. And one additional note to that, we talked about this last week during our last episode, but starting in April, we will be coming back for 2 days a week, Mondays and Wednesdays at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. We've got a ton of awesome content coming to you, ton of great interviews, ton of great episodes, plus HFPod bonus episodes that go up on our premium feed. Lots and lots happening around here in the HFPod wing of the Osiris Studios. RJ, do you want to tell us about our friends at Sunset Lake before we go?
Yeah, one more reminder. We're brought to you in part by Sunset Lake CBD. Just go to sunsetlakecbd.com and use the code HFPod for 20% off. Sunset Lake is awesome. They're certified organic, employee-owned hemp farm located just outside Burlington. They were a dairy farm producing milk for Ben and Jerry's, another group of friends of ours. And then in 2019, they diversified and started growing hemp for CBD. And I use the CBD gummies almost every night. The tincture as well. It's as Brian said earlier, it's a really mellowing experience to use their CBD products. They're really good, and they ship them quickly. And if you support them, you're supporting us. So check out sunsetlakecbd.com and use the code HFPod.
I'm a big believer in the magic of Sunset Lake. It's an amazing organization.
Yeah. And thanks everybody for tuning in and listening and watching. It's nice to see everybody.
Thanks everyone for hanging with us here in our noon hour in the greatest time zone in America live show. RJ, always a pleasure to hang out with you and talk about some fish.
Yeah,
we will
fun.
see you all. It was fun. And is that the Down with Disease riff that I hear back there, or is that the organ that you're?
Yeah. Exactly.
Thank you everyone for hanging with us here. We'll see you next week, and bonus episode coming to you tomorrow morning. So keep an eye out for that. With that, everyone have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk with you all soon. Take care.